Do you remember those vintage recipes you could make in just 10 minutes? The ones that got dinner on the table fast? They kept families fed without fuss, night after night. So why did we stop making the meals that always showed up when we needed them most? Creamed peas on buttered toast was the warm, creamy comfort food you could pull together faster than it took the kettle to whistle. Just open a can of peas, pour them into a saucepan with some milk and a little butter, and stir over low heat until it thickens slightly. Some home cooks would toss in a pinch of flour or cornstarch to help it along, but plenty skipped it. The trick was all in the texture, silky and soft, not watery or clumpy. Meanwhile, slices of white bread were toasted to golden perfection, then generously buttered until they glistened. When the creamy peas were ready, they were ladled right on top. It might not win beauty contests, but this dish was affordable, filling, and beloved in many kitchens from the Great Depression to the late 1950s. A plate of this could calm a grumbling stomach without much effort, especially for working parents or tired children. Even better, it used ingredients that were nearly always on hand, and you could dress it up with bits of ham, paprika, or even shredded cheese if you were feeling fancy. But even plain, it was always something you could count on. The peanut butter and lettuce sandwich is one of those Depression-era holdovers that makes people raise their eyebrows until they try it. At first glance, it seems almost like a dare. Why would anyone put crisp lettuce between slices of bread slathered with peanut butter? But during the 1930s and 1940s, it was an easy, no-cook meal that hit the sweet spot between nutrition and convenience. Peanut butter brought protein and staying power, while iceberg lettuce added crunch and a faint, watery freshness that balanced the stickiness. It was one of those clever tricks where texture did all the heavy lifting. Some families made it fancier with a drizzle of honey, others added thin apple slices or a dash of salt. But the basic version, just peanut butter, lettuce, and soft sandwich bread, was quick, cheap, and surprisingly refreshing. It traveled well in lunchboxes and showed up on supper tables when time or money was tight. These days, it has mostly disappeared from menus, but if you grew up with it, you might remember how odd it looked and how oddly good it actually was. Cottage cheese and pineapple salad was a cold dish that made its way onto countless dinner plates in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s without ever needing an oven or a skillet. It was a mix of convenience and charm, using just a scoop of creamy cottage cheese, a few chunks of canned pineapple, and a single crisp lettuce leaf as a bed. Some versions even topped the whole thing with a glossy red maraschino cherry for visual flair, making it feel like a mini dessert that snuck onto the dinner table. It was served as a salad, a side, or sometimes even a light dessert, perfect for hot evenings or last-minute guests. Housewives appreciated it because it required no cooking and could be assembled in under 10 minutes with ingredients straight from the pantry and fridge. It had the creamy, sweet, tangy flavor balance that defined so many mid-century American dishes. Maybe it sounds strange today, but back then, it was standard on picnic spreads, potluck tables, and family dinners. If you saw that cherry on top, you knew exactly what was underneath. Hot dog and baked bean skillet dinners were born from the marriage of convenience and childhood cravings. They required almost no prep. Just slice up a few hot dogs, toss them in a hot pan, and once they started to brown and curl at the edges, pour in a can of baked beans. That was it. You stirred it around until everything was bubbling, then served it straight from the pan. It was fast, filling, and full of flavor, especially when the bean sauce soaked into the crisped edges of the hot dogs. In the 1960s and 1970s, this was a common weeknight rescue meal. No chopping, no measuring, and no need for side dishes unless you wanted toast or coleslaw on the plate. Kids loved it. Adults tolerated it. But everyone appreciated how little cleanup it took. You could add mustard or brown sugar if you were feeling fancy, or just leave it plain and let the sweet-savory combo do its work. It was the ultimate 10-minute hot meal when your brain was fried and your fridge was nearly empty. The American cheese and tomato open-faced melt was as simple as it was satisfying. You grabbed a slice of white sandwich bread, laid down a slice of tomato, sometimes salted, sometimes not, and placed a square of processed American cheese over it. Then it went under the broiler for a couple of minutes until the cheese started to bubble and melt into the tomato. The corners of the bread crisped up while the middle stayed soft. What came out was gooey, warm, and somehow always more delicious than the sum of its parts. It was popular in the 1950s and 1960s, when quick lunches had to be hot but easy, and families did not want to waste electricity on the stove. You could whip up a tray of these in no time, and people would fight over the browned, blistered cheese on top. Some folks added oregano or a splash of hot sauce, but most kept it plain. It was the kind of dish that taught kids how to use the oven, and how to make something delicious out of almost nothing. Egg salad on saltines was a low-effort, high-reward meal that sat somewhere between a snack and a light lunch. All you needed were a couple of hard-boiled eggs, some mayonnaise, a pinch of salt, and a sleeve of saltine crackers. Mash the eggs with a fork, stir in the mayo, and spoon that creamy mixture onto crackers one by one. Some versions added chopped celery, mustard, or paprika, but many kept it basic. It was salty, creamy, and just rich enough to satisfy without weighing you down. Families turned to it in the 1940s and 1950s when lunch needed to be quick and frugal, and it stayed in rotation well into the 1980s. If you had eggs in the fridge and crackers in the pantry, you were halfway there. It was common to see this on a paper plate during card games, in lunch boxes wrapped in wax paper, or as part of a light summer meal when no one wanted to cook. Even now, it is one of those simple joys that takes minutes to make but sticks in your memory. The quick Bologna and egg scramble was the kind of dish you could throw together half asleep, and it still somehow tasted like a full breakfast. Dice up a few slices of Bologna, toss them into a frying pan, and once they started to sizzle and brown, crack in a couple of eggs and stir. That was it. You could finish cooking it in less than 10 minutes, and it paired perfectly with toast or even wrapped inside a slice of white bread for an on-the-go bite. It became a staple in working-class kitchens from the 1950s to the 1970s, especially for early risers who needed something hot before heading to work or school. Bologna was cheap and easy to store, eggs were almost always on hand, and together they made a hearty, salty, protein-packed dish. Some added onions or cheese, but most kept it plain and quick. The smell alone could drag people out of bed. And the best part? You only dirtied one pan. Fruit cocktail with whipped topping was the shortcut dessert that made every child grin and every tired parent sigh in relief. All it took was one can of fruit cocktail, peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries in syrup, drained and stirred together with a big dollop of whipped topping from the tub. Served chilled, it was creamy, sweet, and light enough to finish off any meal. In the 1970s, this was the go-to dessert for last-minute guests, potlucks, or just a Tuesday night. You could jazz it up with coconut, marshmallows, or chopped nuts, but the plain version had its own charm. The whipped topping clung to every fruit piece, turning even a grape into something decadent. Best of all, you could keep both ingredients on hand for weeks. No baking, no prep, no problem. It was one of those nostalgic little treats that sat at the corner of convenience and comfort, always cold, always sweet, and always gone within minutes. Cheddar and apple butter toast sounds like something out of a fancy cafe, but it was actually a humble 10-minute snack from old farm kitchens. You took a slice of white or wheat bread, spread on a layer of sweet, spiced apple butter, then laid a slice of cheddar cheese on top. Pop it under the broiler or in a toaster oven just long enough to warm it through and melt the edges of the cheese. The result? A gooey, sharp, sweet snack that made no sense on paper but all the sense in your mouth. It was especially popular in the autumn, when apple butter was fresh and cheddar was always in the fridge. Farmers and school kids alike loved it for how fast it came together and how deeply comforting it felt. It had the tang of cheese, the warmth of apples, and the soft crunch of toast. And while it rarely showed up on restaurant menus, it became a beloved secret in home kitchens across the 1940s and 1950s. A bite of this is like a time capsule of cozy flavor. Cold macaroni and pickle salad was the kind of thing that showed up unannounced at summer picnics and somehow vanished faster than anything else on the table. Made with leftover elbow macaroni, chopped dill pickles, a spoonful of mayonnaise, and maybe some celery or onion if you had it, This dish was a masterclass in making do. It was creamy, tangy, crunchy, and came together in under 10 minutes if the pasta was already cooked. During the 1950s through the 1970s, this was a back-pocket recipe for frugal families who needed lunch or a side dish in a hurry. It kept well in the fridge, traveled nicely in wax paper or plastic tubs, and paired beautifully with sandwiches or fried meats. The pickles added just enough brightness to cut through the richness of the mayo, and the pasta made it filling without being heavy. It might not have had the elegance of a soufflé or the flash of a molded salad, but it had staying power. One bite, and you would swear you were back at your aunt's backyard table in midsummer. Potted meat on saltines was the blue-collar lunch that did not pretend to be anything fancy, and that was the point. You could find the little metal cans of potted meat stacked high in grocery stores, especially in the 1950s through the 1970s. The meat inside was soft, salty, and somewhere between pâté and spreadable mystery, made from finely ground pork or beef with seasonings and preservatives. To eat it, you simply peeled off the lid, spooned it straight onto saltines, and maybe topped it with a sliver of onion or a dab of mustard if you were feeling fancy. For factory workers, school kids, and thrifty parents, this was a quick fix that traveled well and stayed shelf-stable in lunchboxes or glove compartments. It had that strange charm of being both humble and oddly satisfying. There was no need to cook, no need to think, just meat, crackers, and a few quiet minutes to enjoy it. It was salty, filling, and unmistakably from a time when simplicity ruled the table. The crunch of the cracker against the smooth spread was all it needed to be a complete meal. The mayonnaise and banana sandwich is the kind of recipe that sounds like a dare, but was once a very real part of many American lunches. During the 1970s, this sweet and creamy pairing showed up in school lunchboxes, kitchen counters, and budget cookbooks alike. You took 2 slices of white bread, spread each with a generous layer of mayonnaise, and placed sliced bananas in between. The result was soft, tangy, sweet, and absolutely polarizing. Some kids loved it, others traded it away. But it was quick, cheap, and surprisingly rich in calories, making it a go-to for households trying to fill stomachs without emptying wallets. Some families added a shake of cinnamon, a drizzle of honey, or even crushed peanuts to give it extra flair. But the classic version kept it simple and strange. Today, it is more of a nostalgic curiosity than a mainstream snack, but anyone who grew up with it remembers the creamy texture, the faint zing of mayo, and the shock of how oddly well it worked. If you were in a rush, out of lunch meat, or just adventurous enough, this sandwich was waiting in the wings. Sardines and mustard on toast was the salty, briny pick-me-up that required almost no time and absolutely no apology. This was not a dish for the timid. In fact, opening a can of sardines was practically a declaration of independence in mid-century kitchens. You laid out your slices of toast, usually buttered and still warm, then carefully placed the sardines on top, sometimes whole, sometimes mashed slightly with a fork. A quick dab of mustard across the top gave it brightness and bite. Some people added sliced onion or a splash of lemon juice, but others left it exactly as it was, bold, oily, and rich in protein. Sardines were cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with nutrition. In the 1950s through the 1970s, this was a lunch you could count on, especially for workers and retirees who wanted something hearty but fast. It filled the belly, cleared the sinuses, and let everyone know you were not afraid of strong flavors. Whether eaten standing over the sink or seated with a folded napkin, this was the kind of 10-minute meal that made a lasting impression. Potato chip and cottage cheese dip was the instant party trick your grandma pulled out between commercials and card games. There was no blender, no chilling, no fuss. You took a container of cottage cheese, stirred in a packet of ranch dressing mix, or onion powder and parsley if you were the make-it-from-scratch type, and that was it. Instant dip. Served with a bowl of salty, ruffled potato chips. It had a cool, creamy texture that stuck to each chip just enough. Unlike sour cream dips that melted fast or mayonnaise-based ones that felt greasy, cottage cheese gave this version a slight tang and a thicker body. It was everywhere in the 1970s and 1980s, showing up at birthday parties, church socials, and any place where a snack was expected, but effort was not. The contrast of crunch and creaminess made it addictive, and you could stretch the whole bowl for a crowd without breaking the bank. It disappeared faster than you could say past the napkins. In less than 10 minutes, your coffee table became a snack bar. Leftover chili over cornbread squares was the ultimate no-waste comfort food that came together with a single microwave beep. The chili was yesterday's, cold, thick, and waiting in a bowl in the fridge. The cornbread came from a box mix, usually baked the night before and cut into squares, often still wrapped in foil. When hunger struck, all you had to do was stack, heat, and eat. The warmth of the chili soaked into the crumbly sweetness of the cornbread, making every bite feel like a reunion of flavors. You could top it with shredded cheese or a splash of hot sauce if you had time, but honestly, you did not need to. This was fast food in its homiest form, nothing fancy, nothing wasted. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was a common sight on dinner tables across the South and Midwest, where boxed cornbread and canned chili were pantry staples. It made use of leftovers without making them feel like repeats. 10 minutes, 1 plate, 0 guilt. Just heat, spoon, and dig in. Cream cheese and celery boats were the no-bake finger food that sailed onto party trays and after-school snacks with equal ease. You grabbed a stalk of celery, washed, trimmed, and cut into finger-length pieces, and filled the groove with smooth cream cheese. That was the base. From there, you could go classic with a dash of paprika, dress it up with sliced olives, or sprinkle chopped walnuts for texture. This snack hit its stride in the 1950s and 1960s, when cream cheese became a household staple and everyone needed something light and easy for bridge clubs, PTA meetings, or just hungry kids. It had the cool crunch of raw celery and the rich softness of the cheese, making it oddly satisfying and completely mess-free. Best of all, it could be prepped in less than 10 minutes and piled high on a tray with no refrigeration panic. Moms loved it, grandmas swore by it, and kids, well, some of them ate the cheese and left the celery, but it still counts. It was clean, quick, and always ready. The peanut butter and pickle sandwich was one of those curious combinations that somehow became a kitchen staple. All it took was a couple of slices of white bread, a layer of peanut butter, and several crinkle-cut dill pickle slices laid right on top. Press it together, slice diagonally, and you had a tangy, salty, nutty snack ready in minutes. People either loved it or questioned your sanity, but for many kids growing up in the 1950s through the 1970s, this sandwich was a lunchtime favorite. It packed flavor, crunch, and protein without needing a stove or even a fridge if you were quick. Moms on the go appreciated that it required no cooking, and kids liked the bold, strange mix that made each bite feel like a surprise. The vinegar from the pickles cut through the richness of the peanut butter just enough to make it work. These days, it is more of a nostalgia punchline, but for those who remember pulling it from a wax paper-wrapped lunch, it still holds a weird kind of magic. Microwave cinnamon apple slices were the cheat code for apple pie cravings without turning on the oven. You grabbed a fresh apple, any kind would do, sliced it thin, placed the slices in a bowl, sprinkled on cinnamon and sugar, maybe added a dab of butter if you had it, and popped the whole thing into the microwave for a minute or two. The result? Soft, warm apple slices swimming in their own syrupy sauce, fragrant enough to make the kitchen smell like a bakery. It was a quick dessert, a cozy snack, or a sweet breakfast side, depending on how you dressed it up. Top it with granola or spoon it over toast, and suddenly you had something that felt homemade and indulgent. In the 1980s, as microwave ovens took over kitchens, this recipe became a go-to for families who wanted fast comfort food without the mess. Kids could make it on their own, and parents could sneak in some fruit without a fuss. No crust, no cleanup, just 10 minutes to warm, spiced bliss. Velveeta quesadillas with hot dogs were the kind of no-recipe recipe that defined busy weeknights and snack-hungry kids. You took a tortilla, flour usually, laid down a few strips of Velveeta, added sliced hot dogs, folded it in half, and tossed it in a skillet until the outside was crisp and the inside was melty. It took maybe 5 minutes per side, and no one ever complained. The combination of gooey processed cheese and salty hot dogs inside a golden, crunchy tortilla made this an instant favorite. It showed up after Little League games, during Saturday morning cartoons, and whenever the fridge was running low on everything else. Velveeta melted smoother than regular cheese, and hot dogs were almost always in the fridge, making this a near-perfect 10-minute meal. Sometimes parents added ketchup or mustard on the side, but usually it was eaten hot off the pan, cut into wedges and devoured before it cooled. It was not elegant, but it was fast, satisfying, and proudly artificial in all the right ways. Canned salmon and cracker patties were the go-to dinner when time was short, the fridge was bare, and you still wanted something hot and satisfying on the plate. A can of salmon, a beaten egg, and some crushed saltine crackers were all it took to make this humble meal come to life. You mixed everything in a bowl, shaped the patties by hand, and dropped them into a skillet to fry until golden brown. They cooked fast and smelled even better, with the outside crisping up while the inside stayed soft and flavorful. These patties were popular in kitchens from the 1930s through the 1970s, especially when fresh meat was too expensive and tinned fish was a reliable standby. You could dress them up with lemon wedges, mustard, or a dab of relish, but even plain they did the trick. Kids loved them, adults depended on them, and families kept them in rotation for decades. One pan, one bowl, and 10 minutes later, you had dinner. Tomato juice and buttered toast might sound bare bones now, but for years it was the breakfast of choice for families looking for something light, fast, and filling. You poured yourself a glass of chilled tomato juice, store-bought or homemade, and added a dash of salt to cut the acidity and wake up your taste buds. Alongside that came 2 slices of toast, buttered while hot so the corners softened and the middle stayed crisp. It was a meal that felt clean and simple, served in American homes throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Dietitians of the time even praised it for its vitamin content and digestive ease. Some folks added a boiled egg or a piece of fruit on the side, but most kept it minimal. It was what you had before heading to work, church, or the garden, something that got you going without slowing you down. If you grew up in that era, the tang of tomato juice and the warmth of buttered bread might still take you right back. Buttered saltines with sliced pickles and cheese were the mid-century snack that made the most out of pantry leftovers. All you needed was a sleeve of saltine crackers, a tub of butter, a jar of pickles, and some processed cheese, usually American or cheddar. Each cracker got a swipe of butter, a thin slice of cheese, and a crisp round of dill pickle, layered like little canapes. Served cold or at room temperature, they had the crunch, salt, and zing that made them perfect for after-school hunger or unexpected guests. In the 1950s and 1960s, this was an unofficial appetizer at every card table and kitchen gathering. You could fancy them up with paprika or swap in sweet pickles if that was your thing. But the original version stayed in rotation for one reason. It took less than 10 minutes and required no cooking at all. Kids made them, moms served them, grandmas approved. It was a salty, tangy bite you could make in the time it took to set the table. Toasted peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were the sugar rush snack that lit up kitchens all through the 1960s and 1970s. Kids would grab 2 slices of white bread, spread one side with peanut butter, the other with marshmallow fluff or mini marshmallows, and pop the whole thing into the toaster oven. In just a few minutes, the bread turned golden. The peanut butter melted into a warm ooze, and the marshmallows puffed up, bubbling slightly at the edges. What came out was sticky, sweet, and just messy enough to be fun. Some added banana slices, some used chocolate chips, but the classic stayed simple. It was fast, cheap, and required no adult supervision, just a toaster and a sweet tooth. This sandwich became a mainstay for after-school snacks, weekend treats, and those late-night cravings where only warm sugar would do. You could eat it standing over the sink or sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. Either way, it hit the spot. Quick grape jelly meatball bites were the party shortcut that no one expected to work, but always disappeared first. You took frozen mini meatballs or pre-cooked ones, dumped them into a saucepan, and added equal parts grape jelly and chili sauce. That was it. Heat until everything was bubbly and sticky, then serve with toothpicks or small forks. In less than 10 minutes, you had a sweet, tangy appetizer that tasted like something far fancier. This recipe exploded in popularity during the 1970s when crockpots and shortcut cooking were in full swing. But even without a slow cooker, these meatballs came together fast on the stovetop. They became the go-to option for last-minute guests, potlucks, or game nights. The sugar from the jelly and the zip from the chili sauce made every bite addictive. People always asked what was in them, and no one ever guessed grape jelly. That was the charm. It was one of those strange, brilliant combos that somehow worked and always impressed. Ritz cracker pizzas were the snack that let kids feel like chefs and parents breathe easy. All you needed were Ritz crackers, a spoonful of tomato sauce, and a sprinkle of shredded cheese. You laid the crackers out on a tray, added a dab of sauce to each, topped with cheese, and placed them under the broiler or in the toaster oven until bubbly. The result was a tiny, crunchy, cheesy bite of satisfaction. No dough to roll, no oven to preheat, and no mess to clean up. Kids made them for sleepovers. Parents used them as quick appetizers, and everyone agreed they were better than they had any right to be. Some folks added pepperoni slices or olives, but the basic 3-ingredient version stayed a favorite. It was a fast way to scratch that pizza itch without waiting for delivery or dealing with leftovers. In 10 minutes or less, you had a full plate of bite-sized comfort food and a happy, quiet kitchen. Canned refried bean and cheese burritos were the ultimate microwave meal for kids coming home hungry in the 1980s. All it took was a flour tortilla, a scoop of canned refried beans, and a handful of shredded cheese. Roll it up, wrap it in a paper towel, and microwave for 1 to 2 minutes until everything was hot and gooey. The beans turned creamy, the cheese melted into strings, and the tortilla got just soft enough to hold it all together. Some kids added salsa or hot sauce, but the classic combo held its own. It was filling, warm, and completely foolproof. Parents loved that it was fast and cheap, and kids loved that they could make it by themselves. These burritos became a staple in lunchrooms, dorm rooms, and snack tables across the country. No stove, no oven, just a microwave and a rumbling stomach. In under 10 minutes, you were back on the couch with your plate, your burrito, and your favorite show. Tuna and cucumber on wheat toast was the breezy, no-cook lunch that felt light but still satisfying. You started with a can of tuna, drained and flaked, mixed with a spoonful of mayonnaise or plain if you preferred. Spread it over a piece of wheat toast, still warm and slightly crisp. Then add a few thin slices of cucumber right on top. The cool crunch of the cucumber balanced the saltiness of the tuna, and the whole thing came together in just minutes. This was a summer favorite in the 1950s and 1960s, when nobody wanted to heat the kitchen but everyone still needed lunch. It looked pretty, tasted fresh, and gave you protein without feeling heavy. Sometimes you added tomato, sometimes a bit of pepper, but mostly you kept it simple. Served with iced tea or lemonade, it was the kind of lunch that let you get back to your day without a food coma. Quick, clean, and classic. Scrambled egg and ketchup sandwiches were the working-class breakfast that moved fast and stuck with you all morning. You cracked a couple of eggs into a hot pan, scrambled them quickly with a pinch of salt, and piled them between 2 slices of soft white bread. Then came the key ingredient, a generous squirt of ketchup. The bread soaked up the heat, the eggs stayed fluffy, and the ketchup added a bright, tangy kick that cut through the richness. No one used measuring spoons. This was instinct cooking, done while tying your shoes or pouring coffee. It became popular in the 1950s and 1960s when speed mattered more than elegance and has stuck around in diner menus and lunchboxes ever since. Some added cheese or bacon, but most kept it plain. It was warm, familiar, and took less than 10 minutes to put together and eat. A handheld breakfast that got the job done. Cheese and green onion tortilla roll-ups were the quiet party hit that somehow vanished from every tray first. All you needed was a pack of flour tortillas, a tub of softened cream cheese, and a bunch of chopped green onions. Spread the cheese evenly, sprinkle on the onions, roll it up tight, and slice into pinwheels. That was it. The soft, creamy filling paired with the bite of onion and the chew of the tortilla made it surprisingly satisfying. No cooking, no waiting, just a few minutes with a knife and a cutting board. These roll-ups became a go-to appetizer from the 1970s onward, showing up at potlucks, showers, and bridge clubs. They were easy to make in big batches, easy to transport, and easy to eat without a plate or fork. Some folks added olives, ham, or herbs, but the basic version stayed a classic. They were cold, fresh, and gone before you knew it. Pineapple and ham toothpick bites were the retro appetizer that required no oven and delivered maximum flavor in a single bite. Just cube up some cooked ham, canned or leftover, drain a can of pineapple chunks, and skewer one of each on a toothpick. Serve cold or room temperature. That was all it took. The sweet tang of the pineapple cut through the saltiness of the ham, and the toothpick made it feel like something special, even if it took under 10 minutes to make. These bites were everywhere from church luncheons to cocktail parties in the 1960s and 1970s. If you saw a tray of them, you knew they would be the first to disappear. They were clean, easy to prep, and perfect for feeding a crowd on short notice. Some versions added a sprinkle of paprika or a glaze, but the basic duo of fruit and meat stood on its own. Simple, sharp, and always satisfying. Molasses milk with soda crackers. Sounds strange now, but for rural families and Depression-era kitchens, it was a fast, practical breakfast when the fridge was nearly bare. You would warm up some milk, stir in molasses for sweetness, and crumble soda crackers right on top. That was it. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, gave you a little energy, and made use of things that lasted forever in the pantry. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and packed with nutrients. Soda crackers were everywhere, and milk, fresh or canned, was always a breakfast staple. Old farm cookbooks, church recipe cards, and rural homemaker guides all had versions of this tucked inside, passed around by folks who knew how to stretch the simplest ingredients. It was humble, filling, and comforting in its own odd way. These days, it is almost unheard of, replaced by granola bars and cereal bowls. But back then, this quiet little breakfast got people through hard mornings with nothing but warm milk and a little ingenuity. Salmon and canned pea toasts were how you made pantry food look halfway fancy when the clock and your energy ran out. You took canned salmon, mashed it with mayonnaise, stirred in some peas, and spread it thick over hot toast. That was dinner. It sounds simple now, but when fresh meat was scarce or paychecks were tight, this was the kind of meal that kept families going. The old cookbooks were filled with little tricks like this, ways to stretch canned goods into something that almost felt special. Salmon from a can never fooled anyone, but the crunch of toast and the soft peas made it oddly satisfying. You might even see a sprinkle of pepper or a squeeze of lemon if someone was feeling bold. It came together fast, filled you up, and for those 10 minutes in the kitchen, it made you feel like you still had control over dinner. Sometimes that is all anyone needed. Garlic-scented, spicy, and elegantly minimal, this Italian treasure draws hungry fans with its impressive simplicity. 10-minute pasta aglio e olio soared in popularity thanks to its swift cooking time, making it ideal for busy households yearning for full-bodied flavor. Historians trace its roots to Naples, where garlic, oil, and chili flakes found their way into countless frugal suppers, proving that even minimal ingredients can create culinary magic. Enthusiasts often joke that this one-pot wonder is proof you don't need a full Italian culinary degree to impress guests, though precision in cooking pasta al dente remains key. Simplicity and accessibility shine through as garlic-infused olive oil blankets each strand, introducing a subtle heat that blends beautifully with the starchy richness. Nostalgia lingers because generations have embraced it as an homage to rustic Italian peasant cooking, where fancy sauces take a back seat to wholesome foundations. For those keeping an eye on speed, a 10-minute cook time makes this enticing for weeknight dinners, unexpected guests, or even late-night cravings. Grape jelly meatball skillet might sound like a strange mix now, but back then, it was one of those quirky, sweet, and savory meals that showed up fast and stretched what little meat you had. You browned some mini meatballs in a skillet, poured in grape jelly and a splash of mustard, and let it all bubble together. In 10 minutes flat, dinner was ready. It was sweet, tangy, salty, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this because they turned a small amount of ground beef into a meal that felt bigger than it was. You could find this in old church cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or scribbled onto recipe cards tucked in drawers. It was not about fancy ingredients. It was about getting something warm, satisfying, and a little fun onto the table, fast. Today it feels forgotten, but back then, this sweet skillet meal kept homes running during the toughest weeks. Pimento cheese sandwiches on white bread were the southern lunchbox staple that quietly made their way into kitchens across the country. You made up a big batch of pimento cheese, usually shredded cheddar, mayo, and little diced pimento peppers, then slapped it between slices of soft sandwich bread. That was lunch, fast and done. If you were lucky, the batch had been chilling in the fridge overnight so the flavors had time to settle. It showed up everywhere, from school cafeterias to Sunday church gatherings, and you did not need fancy ingredients to pull it together. The filling looked bright orange and odd to anyone who had never tried it, but it was creamy, sharp, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added extras like sliced pickles or lettuce, but the plain version stuck around because it was quick, cheap, and kept everyone fed when time was tight. Old cookbooks had pages of pimento cheese variations, but the classic stayed the same: easy, portable, and just filling enough to get you through the day. Scrambled eggs with evaporated milk were one of those frugal breakfasts tucked inside old homemaker guides and church fundraisers from the 1940s through the 70s. The secret was canned milk. You would crack your eggs, whisk in a splash of evaporated milk, and fry them up fast. The milk made them fluffy, rich, and stretch further than plain eggs alone. This mattered more than people today might think. During wartime and lean grocery weeks, a can of evaporated milk was gold. It lasted longer than fresh milk, cost less, and made ordinary eggs feel like a treat. Some families tossed in herbs or cheese if they had extra, but most kept it plain: soft eggs with just a little salt and pepper. Quick, simple, and done in under 10 minutes. You will not find this recipe on Instagram or in trendy brunch spots, but it kept families fed and mornings moving. People used what they had, made it work, and turned humble ingredients into something satisfying. Spam and egg scramble was one of those 10-minute dinners that showed up again and again when times got lean. You diced up a can of Spam, fried it in a hot skillet until the edges curled and crisped, then scrambled in a few eggs with onions if they were around. It all came together fast, filled your plate, and made sure nobody went to bed hungry. Spam was a pantry staple for a reason: cheap, shelf-stable, and surprisingly versatile. The old cookbooks were full of ways to stretch it into something that felt like a real meal. Toss in eggs, and suddenly, dinner looked good enough to serve without apology. It was salty, hearty, and loaded with that familiar taste of making do with what you had. Families leaned on quick meals like this because they worked. 10 minutes on the stove, a hot plate in front of everyone, and dinner was done. No one claimed it was fancy, but when your pantry was empty and the paycheck still days away, it tasted like a small victory. Funny how those simple, practical meals stuck with us. They filled the gaps and filled us up. In culinary circles, shrimp scampi often conjures images of sophisticated restaurants, yet it can be crafted in a flash at home without fuss. Earning the moniker speedy, this streamlined version harnesses fresh shrimp, garlic, butter, and lemon to produce a dazzling entree in mere minutes. Historical records indicate that the term scampi originally referred to small lobsters known as langoustines in Italy, but American cooks embraced shrimp for a more accessible twist on the classic approach. Even minimalists find it gratifying. A swift sauté brings out succulent textures while blending buttery richness with citrus tang. Devotees consider it an ideal solution when time is scarce, but flavor must shine. Some playfully note that it keeps dinner guests from scuttling off early, thanks to its irresistible aroma. Indeed, experts praise shrimp as a great source of lean protein, and with modern supply chains, it remains widely available. Because ingredients are straightforward and easy to obtain, this recipe demonstrates that culinary elegance doesn't require intricate steps or hours of work. Served over pasta or alongside crusty bread, the warm, garlicky sauce appeals to both connoisseurs and casual diners. Cottage cheese and peach. Half plate was the kind of quick meal that felt just fancy enough to pass for lunch, even when the fridge was nearly empty. You opened a can of peach halves, plopped them on a plate, and added a big scoop of cottage cheese right in the center. That was it. 10 minutes, maybe less. It sounds odd now, but back then, this sweet and savory combo showed up at church teas, ladies' luncheons, and weekday meals when time and money were both running low. It was light, refreshing, and filled just enough of that hunger gap to get you through the afternoon. You could dress it up with a little sprinkle of nutmeg or a cherry on top if you were feeling fancy, but most kept it simple. It came from a time when canned fruit was a pantry staple, cottage cheese counted as protein, and families got creative to stretch every dollar. Another forgotten classic from the old cookbook that kept homes running smoothly. Cinnamon toast with broiler crisp was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once felt fancy, even though it came straight from the bread box. You would take a slice of white bread, butter it generously, sprinkle it with sugar and cinnamon, and slide it under the broiler until the top bubbled and crisped. That was it. No pancake mix, no waffle irons, just the broiler and a little patience. Kids loved it because it felt like dessert. Parents loved it because it was fast, and everyone loved it because it used pantry staples. During the Great Depression and even into the 70s, families relied on simple breakfasts like this to stretch groceries without giving up flavor. The sugar caramelized on top, the bread toasted just enough, and suddenly plain breakfast felt like a treat. You could find versions of it in old community cookbooks, school recipe cards, even homemaker magazines. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of frozen waffles and cereal boxes. Quick potato flake pancakes were one of those practical budget dinners born from the back of old pantry shelves. You grabbed a box of instant potato flakes, mixed them with water and a little egg if you had it, then shaped the dough into small pancakes and fried them up in butter. That was dinner. It came together in 10 minutes flat and filled you up with simple, salty, crispy goodness. These pancakes were a staple of old cookbooks that loved pantry meals you could make fast with whatever was on hand. No peeling, no mashing, no waiting for potatoes to boil, just flakes, water, and a hot skillet. You could add herbs or cheese to dress them up, but most families kept it simple. They were crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and filled your plate without much effort. This was dinner that made the best of tight grocery budgets and busy nights. Funny how something as humble as potato flakes could feel like a proper meal when you needed it most. Crisp bacon, juicy tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce layered between slices of toasted bread might seem ordinary, yet they form a timeless favorite that transcends culinary fads. Often referred to as the old-fashioned BLT, this sandwich exemplifies the essence of speed and convenience, delivering a hearty meal with minimal preparation time. Culinary historians trace its lineage to early 20th century American diners, where bacon, lettuce, and tomato combined to create a balanced combination of savory, fresh, and tangy flavors. Some enthusiasts humorously claim that BLT stands for Better Lunch Triumph, reflecting its universal appeal and simple construction. Though easy to assemble, this sandwich boasts complex layers of taste and texture. The smoky crispness of bacon, paired with refreshing lettuce and the natural sweetness of a vine-ripened tomato, culminates in a harmonious bite that satisfies almost any midday craving. Nostalgia emerges each time it appears on a plate, as countless childhood memories revolve around that first crunchy mouthful. Its accessibility means that even cooks with limited time or confidence can excel at preparing this familiar treat. Mashed banana and mayo sandwiches might sound strange to modern ears, but back in the day, this sweet and tangy sandwich was a Southern staple that showed up in plenty of lunchboxes. You mashed up a ripe banana, spread it on soft sandwich bread, and added a swipe of mayonnaise. That was it. It was quick, cheap, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this when groceries were scarce and meals had to stretch. The banana added sweetness, the mayo gave it creaminess, and together they turned plain bread into a fast, satisfying lunch. You would find this sandwich scribbled in old community cookbooks, passed down at church picnics, or tucked into handwritten recipe boxes that lived in kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of folks growing up during hard times, this odd little sandwich was a reliable 10-minute fix when money was tight and hunger was knocking. Quick skillet tamale pie was the shortcut lunch that showed up in nearly every old cookbook under hearty fast meals. You browned some ground beef, poured in canned chili, sprinkled crushed corn chips over the top, and finished it off with shredded cheese. It was fast, filling, and about as close to homemade comfort food as you could get when groceries were scarce and the clock was ticking. Moms loved it because the ingredients were cheap, and kids devoured it because it was spicy, cheesy, and crunchy all at once. Some folks tossed on sour cream or salsa to dress it up, but most families stuck with the basics when money was tight. It was not authentic tamale pie, but nobody cared. It hit the spot, fed the family, and came together in under 10 minutes. You could find this recipe scribbled in old notepads, passed down from neighbors, or tucked into faded cookbooks that promised fast, filling lunches for busy days. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cream was about as classic as breakfast could get. Quick oats simmered on the stove, topped with a spoonful of brown sugar and a splash of canned milk. It was ready in 10 minutes flat, cheap to make, and warm enough to shake off the worst winter mornings. Families across America leaned on this breakfast when budgets were tight, but everyone still needed something filling to start the day. Quick oats cooked faster than traditional oats, brown sugar gave just enough sweetness, and canned milk made the whole thing creamy even if fresh milk was hard to come by. It showed up in school lunch guides, frugal homemaker magazines, and those old cookbooks buried at the back of every kitchen drawer. For a lot of folks, this was not a special occasion breakfast. It was the daily routine, quiet, dependable, and gone in under 10 minutes. Funny how something so ordinary could disappear so completely, replaced by instant packets and flashy coffee shop menus. Quick tomato egg drop soup was a fast, practical dinner that showed up in old cookbooks for families juggling tight grocery budgets and tighter schedules. You started with hot broth, usually whatever bouillon cube or soup base you had in the cupboard. Then you poured in canned tomatoes and stirred everything together until it simmered. The final touch was whisked eggs, slowly dripped in as you stirred, turning into silky ribbons in the hot broth. It looked a little fancier than it was, but this meal was all about speed and making the best of what you had. The tomatoes added sweetness, the broth made it filling, and the eggs gave enough protein to keep everyone going. It came together in less than 10 minutes and cost next to nothing, which is exactly why old cookbooks loved it. It was warm, fast, and comforting without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled bellies and stretched paychecks at the same time. Funny how those quick little soup tricks turned into classics that still stick with people. In countless family kitchens, speedy rice pilaf stands as a testament to how resourcefulness can satisfy palates in minutes. Historically, pilaf traces back centuries to Middle Eastern and Central Asian cuisines, though it found renewed popularity across the United States as packaged convenience foods gained momentum in the 20th century. Some comedic observers say it's a dish that never retires, showcasing staying power in households across the country. At its core, this recipe relies on briefly sautéing onions in a dash of oil, then combining quick-cooking rice with flavorful spices, ensuring a well-rounded taste without prolonged stovetop watch. The resulting texture is fluffy yet distinct, offering a balance of softness and gentle bite that appeals to all ages. Nostalgia emerges when recalling mid-century TV commercials that championed instant rice, promising a perfect side dish ready faster than a station break. Today, home cooks still appreciate its no-fuss approach, which requires only basic ingredients and minimal monitoring. The convenience resonates with those juggling busy schedules, who often joke that any dish requiring more than 10 minutes conflicts with precious downtime. Rice and raisin pudding on the stove was a 10-minute dessert that turned humble leftovers into something sweet, filling, and comforting when times were tough. You scooped leftover rice into a pot, poured in milk, added sugar, tossed in some raisins, and stirred it all together over low heat. That was it. In minutes, the mixture thickened into a creamy, sweet pudding that could stretch a small amount of rice into a treat for the whole family. It sounds simple now, but back then, every leftover counted, and recipes like this helped families avoid wasting a single grain. You would find rice and raisin pudding scribbled onto recipe cards, tucked into community cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations. It was a clever way to stretch ingredients, keep kids happy, and turn plain staples into something that felt like dessert. Most folks kept it basic, but sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or a dash of vanilla would show up if the pantry allowed. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, this quick stovetop dessert was a saving grace when groceries ran low and everyone needed a little sweetness. Tomato soup with soda cracker crumble was the poor man's lunch that somehow managed to feel warm, filling, and familiar without draining your pantry. You heated up canned tomato soup on the stove, crushed soda crackers over the top, maybe added a little pepper, and lunch was done in under 10 minutes. It was cozy, simple, and showed up in almost every household because it used staples that were always around. Kids loved smashing the crackers into the bowl. Parents loved how it stretched one can of soup into something that could actually fill a belly. This was the lunch for snow days, sick days, or those afternoons when the fridge was bare and dinner still felt far away. The recipe popped up in every thrift store cookbook, always listed under quick meals or lunches for a crowd. Some families added milk or a pat of butter to make it richer, but most kept it plain and fast. It sounds basic now, but for families scraping by in the 1960s or 1970s, this little soup was a warm reminder that simple food could still get the job done. Apple ring pancakes were straight out of those old Betty Crocker cookbooks and Sunday church potlucks that every neighborhood seemed to have. You would slice an apple into thick rings, dip them in pancake batter, and fry them up on the griddle. The result was a warm, fluffy pancake wrapped around sweet fruit, all ready in under 10 minutes. Kids loved them because it felt like dessert for breakfast, and parents loved them because they used what was already in the fridge. Apples were easy to keep on hand. Batter came together fast, and the whole thing cost next to nothing. Some folks dusted them with powdered sugar, others kept it plain, but either way, it was a breakfast that disappeared fast. These showed up everywhere, from rural farmhouses to suburban kitchens, quietly filling plates long before frozen waffles and toaster pastries took over. It is one of those breakfasts you do not hear about anymore. But back then, it was a reliable way to start the day. Minute rice with canned chili and cheese was the dinner of champions. If your definition of champion was someone who worked 12 hours and still had to put food on the table. That old minute rice box was a lifeline back then, cooking up fluffy in just a few minutes. You dumped canned chili right over the top, shredded some cheddar if you had it, and dinner was done. Nobody expected it to be gourmet, but it filled you up, stuck to your ribs, and made sure you were ready for the next shift, the next chore, the next whatever life threw at you. The cookbooks from those days leaned hard on pantry meals like this because they worked. They were honest. Quick dinners that kept you standing, even when life tried to knock you down. And hey, melted cheese makes everything better. In times of hectic schedules, a savory bowl of noodles can feel like an instant remedy for dinnertime stress. With 10-minute stir-fried noodles, there is minimal chopping, easy cleanup, and undeniable flavor. Speed is paramount here. People balancing work and family can still enjoy a hearty meal. Historically, noodles have held a revered place in Asian cuisine, with archaeologists finding the earliest examples in China over 4,000 years ago. This updated recipe calls for quick-cooked noodles, fresh vegetables, and a splash of soy sauce, culminating in a meal both satisfying and straightforward. Some home cooks joke that stir-frying is the official sport of last-minute dinners, praising its capacity to salvage any leftover produce. Texture remains a hallmark, combining crisp, tender vegetables with pleasantly chewy noodles. Nostalgia factors in as many recall the era when simple stir-fries gained traction in American kitchens during the 1970s. Meanwhile, accessibility stands out since few specialized ingredients are required and the entire process relies on a single pan. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy. It was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups were the lazy day lunch every kid begged for, and every parent threw together when the cupboards looked bare. You flattened a slice of white bread, laid down a piece of cheese, rolled in a hot dog, and either microwaved it or crisped it up in a pan. It was fast, cheesy, and exactly what you needed when there were hungry mouths and barely any groceries. Some folks sliced them into little bites for parties or potlucks, but most families just ate them whole with a squirt of mustard or ketchup on the side. These roll-ups showed up in almost every old-school cookbook under quick meals or lunches for kids because they made one pack of hot dogs stretch a long way. You could make a whole tray of them in minutes, which is why this quirky little lunch became a go-to when time and money were both running low. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, and that is what counted. Soft-boiled egg with buttered soldiers was the breakfast shortcut every British American household swore by when time was tight, but comfort still mattered. You would soft-boil an egg, slice toast into thin strips called soldiers, and dip them right into the runny yolk. Breakfast done in under 10 minutes, warm, filling, and good enough to start even the busiest day. It was simple, practical, and everywhere in old cookbooks that cared more about frugality than fancy plating. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries ran low, but everyone still needed something protein-packed and fast. Kids loved it for the dipping, parents loved it for the speed, and it quietly filled countless tables from the 1930s through the 70s. Somewhere along the way, soft-boiled eggs and buttered soldiers disappeared under frozen waffles and drive-through breakfasts. But back then, it was one of those small, satisfying meals that made mornings a little easier. Corned beef hash from the can was one of those pantry miracles that turned a tin of meat and potatoes into a hot, filling dinner without much fuss. You sliced open the can, dumped the hash into a hot skillet, and let it crisp up around the edges until it was golden and ready to eat. You could fry an egg on top if you had one, but even plain, it did the job. This meal came straight from those old cookbooks that knew exactly how to stretch groceries and fill a plate fast. Corned beef hash was salty, hearty, and packed enough flavor to make up for how simple it was. It fed families during tight times, filled lunchboxes, and showed up on the table when there was not much else to work with. It might not have been fancy, but it was practical. And back then, practical meals were king. These dinners got everyone fed in under 10 minutes, with nothing wasted and no one left hungry. Funny how even canned food like this turned into something that stuck around in people's memories. A staple of potlucks and holiday gatherings, deviled egg redux breathes new life into a venerable classic. Early references to deviled eggs date back to ancient Rome, although the term deviled gained traction in 18th century Britain to describe spiced dishes. The modern spin often features tangy additions like Dijon mustard or a hint of vinegar, ensuring a zesty bite that balances the inherent creaminess of the yolk mixture. Culinary historians note that mayonnaise-based fillings became popular in the mid-1900s, appealing to a generation seeking straightforward, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Even home cooks pressed for time can whip them together in minutes. Simply boil, peel, halve, and blend. With minimal ingredients and easy assembly, these bite-sized treats perfectly combine speed and convenience. Their portability contributes to their enduring popularity, whether they appear at a casual brunch or a formal dinner. While the nostalgic factor remains strong, variations continue to emerge, showcasing unexpected garnishes like smoked paprika or crumbled bacon. Some folks joke that deviled eggs disappear faster than free donuts on a Monday morning, testifying to their irresistible charm. Fried potatoes and onion skillet was a fast, hearty stovetop meal that showed up in countless kitchens when times were tough and bellies needed filling without much fuss or money. You would slice up potatoes, chop some onions, heat a little oil or butter in the skillet, and fry everything until golden and crispy. That was it. It sounds simple now, but back when groceries were scarce and time was short, this was a meal that worked. The potatoes filled everyone up, the onions added flavor, and the skillet turned humble pantry staples into something hot, hearty, and satisfying. Some folks added eggs, bacon, or herbs if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. You would find this recipe scribbled on old note cards, tucked into grandma's cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth through generations of families who knew how to stretch every last ingredient. Fried potatoes and onions might seem forgotten today, but back then, it was a reliable fix for hungry families trying to make groceries last, keep dinner on the table, and survive the lean weeks when every meal counted just a little more. If one of these vintage quick fix recipes made you smile, tell us your favorite in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more delicious blasts from the past.